All right, guys, here we go. Continuing with Chapter 10. This is Video B and looking at Section 4 of your notes, talking in detail about the FCC. First off, the FCC, one of its major roles is that of the granting of licenses. After finding a suitable radio frequency or TV channel, or after a company purchases a license from a current license holder, all applicants must meet some minimum qualifications. First off, the applicant must be a U.S. citizen or an organization that is free from significant foreign control. That is a predominantly American-based company. Next, the applicant must meet certain character qualifications. Now, this sort of criteria can be somewhat subjective, but basically what they are going to look for is an overall positive reputation by various means, whether it's in terms of broadcasting excellence or being just kind of outstanding within the community as a whole, having a positive look by the public of the company as a whole, those sorts of things. So they are looking at the character of the owners of the station that is looking to get licensed. Some financial and technical considerations. The new applicant must assert financial capability. It can be rather expensive to maintain a broadcast facility. And it's not cheap to do the licenses and the regulatory sort of things that the FCC requires. So they want to know, can the licensee afford it? All applicants must demonstrate that they can meet all of the technical requirements concerning equipment operation. So they need to be able to show that they're going to stay within the parameters of where they can broadcast at, in terms of the frequency, in terms of being able to broadcast at the licensed power of the station, those sorts of things. The applicant must also propose an affirmative action employment plan. And basically, we'll talk more about affirmative action a little bit later on, but basically it's the idea that they need to be able to claim and prove that they would be an equal opportunity employer, that they would not discriminate against those that are applying to work at their particular station. Diversity of ownership. Throughout its history of granting licenses, the FCC has generally endorsed a philosophy that diversity of ownership was a desirable social goal. However, under pressure from the courts and Congress, the Commission has relaxed many of its rules limiting ownership. So there's a couple different things going on here. Where they're talking about diversity of ownership, they are talking about there being many owners of licenses, and it does lend one to believe that that would also include female ownership, minority ownership, which was an ideal, but they're also just talking about diversity of ownership in that the owners severally, there would be numerous owners of various licenses. With the various laws that have come into place in the last 25 years and more, we've seen those rules very much get relaxed. So you do have a lot of larger companies that own a large percentage of the media spectrum. As far as license renewal goes, each radio and TV station must apply for a license renewal every 8 years. When a license comes up for renewal, the FCC must determine whether the station has operated in the public interest. So it's kind of it's almost kind of a grading period, if you will, for the licensee whenever they apply for renewal. What does the FCC look for during renewal periods? First off, the form makes sure that the station's most recent ownership report, which lists owners and shareholders, is on file with the Commission. The form also makes sure that the licensee is an American citizen, checks for the extent of foreign control, and asks if the station has maintained for public inspection a file that contains those documents required by commission rules. These days, the public inspection file for a TV or radio station is going to be found online at the FCC's website. And most TV and radio stations, when you go to the station website, will have a link available for you to go directly to their public file. Commercial TV stations must also report their programs that address the educational needs of children. That is a special report for television. It's included as part of the public file, and it's something that can be looked up to show that that stations are meeting the requirements for educational and instructional programming. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Competing applications. What happens when there's more than one group that is looking to apply for a particular frequency? Well, the FCC has settled on a method called renewal expectancy. If an incumbent station has provided substantially sound and favorable past service, it would be difficult for a challenger to be granted the license over the established station. So it is possible, it can happen, but generally, as long as a broadcaster is following the rules and doing what they're supposed to do, there's usually not going to be an objection by the FCC in renewing their license. One big thing that can get you denied for a license is if you lie to the FCC. Better to be honest in all things. If you've broken the rules, fess up, because the FCC does not take too well to people trying to cover things up. At the mildest level, the FCC can issue a letter of reprimand that scolds a station for some practice that is not in the public interest. So if a station does something wrong and they're caught, the FCC may just shake a finger at them and say, don't do it again. Other legal remedies include a cease and desist order, which makes a station halt a certain practice. They can also be fined. They could have to pay a fine to the FCC. Formally, that is called a forfeiture. So they're forfeiting money to the FCC because they broke a rule. The idea behind short-term renewal, that's something else the FCC can do. Instead of renewing a license for the full 8 years, they might do it for maybe 2 years. This gives the commission a chance to take an early look at a station to determine if past deficiencies have been corrected. The FCC then, if nothing else works, or even just go to this right away if they want to, they could basically refuse to renew a license, or they could revoke a license that is currently in force. So just because you have a license and it's good for 8 years doesn't necessarily mean you get to keep it for 8 years if you're not doing what you're supposed to do. As far as policy, the FCC can enact rules governing some aspect of broadcasting or cable. To enact a rule, the Commission must announce a proposal and allow for public comments. Moreover, the FCC can't put most new rules and regulations into effect until it publishes what is called a summary. So there is a process in which rules are made. Basically, an announcement's made. They want the public's input on that. A summary is published so that people can read the scope of what is proposed in the new rule that they are making. The FCC maintains an Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, which analyzes trends and attempts to anticipate future policy problems. So they do their own research as well to make sure that the rules that they are suggesting, they try to future-proof them as much as they possibly can. As far as cable, satellite, the internet, the FCC's involvement in them, well, the FCC does not license cable TV systems. Instead, states and local governments may grant franchises to various local cable operators. So whether you have a certain cable company in your municipality or not is going to be based on whether that cable company has made an agreement with the municipality. Most of us in the CCCC college area, if we have option for cable, it's going to be Spectrum, but there may be other opportunities out there as well, depending on your local town. The local franchise authority has the power to regulate the rates charged for basic cable service, the lowest level of service that a subscriber can buy. Basically, this is going to cover retransmission of the local broadcast stations and maybe a couple of other cable channels. And that's going to be the cheapest thing that you can get, the absolute minimum. That is something that the government has put into place to help people to be able to get their local broadcast signals if, for whatever reason, they can't do it by means of an antenna, and to try to keep that cost affordable, because the government believes that the broadcast spectrum, the broadcast communication, is an important, valuable resource for the sake of the democracy of the country. Aside from that, though, cable systems can set their own rates for other tiers of service. FCC oversight in these areas. Cable systems can carry signals of local broadcast stations. They they need to. Also, the rules for equal opportunity employment, those are there as well. And the FCC also enforces maintenance of public files that are held by the various companies there. The 1999 Satellite Home Viewer Improvement Act, or SHVI, attempts to put satellite carriers on an equal footing with cable companies, thus increasing competition and giving more choices to consumers. One of the things that this act allowed for was for satellite systems to be able to carry local broadcast stations, and it makes determinations as to whether certain markets will indeed get their local stations and which markets may wind up getting broadcast stations from another market. There's a little bit of a difference there, as opposed to cable that is required to carry local broadcast stations. The FCC's role with regard to regulating the internet is still evolving. Net neutrality, one of the big things that had come across there, we talked about that briefly earlier. And if you continue on in courses in the BPT program, you talk about that in much more detail when we get to the broadcast programming class. So if you stick around with us, you'll get to hear a lot more about that. Stations must offer political candidates equal opportunities to airtime. These are opportunities accepted by one candidate, and then they need to be made available to any other candidate for office. You can't run a broadcast outlet and provide airtime to just the Democrat candidate and not give the opportunity for airtime to the Republican candidate, or vice versa. Broadcasters are prohibited from charging more for political time than they do for other kinds of commercials. This is called providing time at the lowest unit rate, so that it is as affordable as possible for candidates to be able to purchase airtime for their ads. Also, candidates must be charged the same as their opponents. So they're all eligible for that lowest unit rate for the airtime. There are also various nuances regarding the way these rules are enacted and enforced. There are certain exceptions and exemptions in terms of the way that equal opportunity is carried out. One of the major exceptions would be as it relates to news coverage. That is generally considered to be exempt. If you're covering a story that revolves around a certain political candidate, the opposing candidate can't require the news outlet to provide equal time just for the sake of getting camera time or broadcast time for that particular candidate. News is a different animal as opposed to public access shows and advertising and things like that. So with that, we finish up another section of the notes. We'll continue on to part 5 when you join me over at part C of chapter 10.